Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
I was curious what your thoughts would be on how the Bible would inform today, but that's a very broad question, and I want to touch on Jonathan Edwards too. So let me ask the question this way. If Jonathan Edwards would stop by, maybe take a tour of the country or just kind of, become abreast of the situation, what do you think his thoughts would be to the church?
Yeah. I think Edwards was very prophetic. In 1746, he wrote a treatise entitled Religious Affections. And in the Religious Affections, he is trying to delineate at the time the revival, the First Great Awakening, that was really sparked. And you think about the First Great Awakening, you think of figures like George Whitefield and so forth. But Edwards really, in many ways, sparked the First Great Awakening with a series of 5 lectures on the doctrine of justification by faith alone in 1734. And that sparked the First Great Awakening in the Connecticut Valley area, and then it spread out from there. By 1740, George Whitefield has come over, and the First Great Awakening is just spreading like a wildfire. It's just spreading. And everybody's getting saved, and everyone is converting to Christ. And Edwards, though, is also looking at that and saying there appear to be false professors. This seems to be for some just sort of an emotional kind of thing they're getting caught up in. And so how do we delineate true conversion from false conversion? How do we see the real fruit-bearing effects of revival? So in 1746, he writes Religious Affections, and I say that to say, I think he would say, just go back and if he came and looked at the contemporary church today, he'd say, y'all need to go back and read Religious Affections, because one of the things about Religious Affections is it talks about the things that are requisite for true revival to have taken place, requisite for true Christianity to be in place. Things like Christians are possessed of what he calls that lamb-like, dove-like spirit and temper of Jesus Christ. He talks about the place of holiness among believers. And so I think he would look at the church today and say that in many ways we've lost our first love. Mm. And I think in our day of celebrity pastors giving themselves over, desperately trying to build a platform and become influencers and thought leaders rather than physicians of the soul. The old Puritan idea of a pastor being a physician of the soul. Mm-hmm. Ferguson once said the Puritans were not just physicians of the soul, but they were also pharmacists of the conscience. They knew which shelf to go to get the right medicine. Oh, right. Wow. They were physicians, but they knew which shelf to go to take the right medicine, to the right salve to put on the wounds of their people. And so I think he would look at pastors and say, okay, you've built platforms, but do you know the lay of your sheep's wool? Do you know the lay of your sheep's wool? Do you know them? I think he would ask pastors, are you covered in sheep poo? Because if you're going to, sheep are messy creatures, man. You're going to get covered in it, right? Mm-hmm. I think he would wonder if the church truly has had an encounter with and an understanding of the nature of God. Mm. So, and the nature of God and the person of Christ. I think I'd said before we got started, I think at the end of the day, most heresies can be traced back to issues regarding the nature of God and the nature of Christ. The nature and not just the person of Christ, but the work of Christ. For instance, the whole issue of the new perspectives, but you don't hear a whole lot about that anymore, but the new perspectives on Paul from, say, the early to mid-2000s, we think it was an issue over justification and imputation. Really what was at stake there was a reconfiguring of the nature of the atonement, what was actually accomplished in the atonement. But of course, if you mess around with the atonement, you do away with penal substitutionary atonement, you're not going to have imputation. If you don't have imputation, you're not going to have a biblical definition of justification. Justification is going to be redefined corporately as some sort of sociological thing, which is what the new perspectives movement actually did. And so you trace that back to the work of Christ. Or you look at the various heresies and cults that have developed over the years. It usually has something to do with the person of Christ, the nature of Christ, or the doctrine of God. And so I think Edwards would look at the church today and invite us to revisit a robust theology, what's called a theology proper, or the doctrine of God. Because as the old statement goes, God created man in his image, and we've been returning the favor ever since. Just, okay, look, I'm not going to give God an image overhaul. I'm going to try to understand the nature of God as he's revealed himself and let that undo me.
Let's not pass over that. You said we've been created in the image of God and we've been trying to return the favor ever since. Mm-hmm. Do you mean that we often view God as a really great human, essentially.
Yeah,
And we're not putting him in the right category of God with a capital G. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think that. I think we view God as, and this is because we're all postmodernists. All of us are. We've all breathed in the air of it, and we are desperately trying to escape it. So at a certain level, postmodernism has impacted all of us, and what that means for, say, objectivity and predication. And if we follow, say, philosophers like Richard Rorty and a communitarian hermeneutic, or Ludwig Wittgenstein or Jacques Derrida, et cetera, or even if you consider, say, the French philosophers like Michel Foucault or Jean-François Lyotard, the idea of objectivity and predication just goes out the window. And if that's the case, and then I can kind of impregnate words with whatever meanings I want them to have. And so when we apply that to something like God, we redefine him in a way that's convenient for us,
Yes.
or a way that's useful for us.
Yes. If Edwards was giving advice, do you think it would be one or the other, or a combination of two, which is what America needs right now is Christians on fire from God. We need a revival.
Mm-hmm.
And we also need those revived Christians to get involved in governmental leadership and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Would he touch on that at all, you think, or would the focus just be on revival?
It's a great question, and historically, the answer can be seen in the fact that Edwards, as a minister in Northampton, and again, his date 1703 to 58, the minister was not viewed as this sort of sideline guy over here. The pastor in the colonies at the time was viewed as a very socially pertinent individual. And so Edwards would not have been a politico. I'm not saying that Edwards would have supported kind of the 1980s kind of moral majority kind of culture war kind of thing, but he would not have been able to conceive of the minister or of Christians not being involved in the cultural conversation.
I see.
Yeah.
Fascinating.